Welcome to Learn at Work, a webinar series presented by Work, a journal of prevention, assessment, and rehabilitation. I'm Karen Jacobs, the founding editor of Work, and I'll be the moderator for today's exciting webinar. I do want to do a shout out that the 2019 webinar series is presented in cooperation with the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society. So I'm going to turn this webinar now over to our speaker.
Thank you, Karen. I'm glad to be with you on this platform. Hello, everybody from all over the world, those who are with us now, and those who will listen to this presentation in the future. I am Hashim Abu Tariya. I am an associate professor of occupational therapy. I graduated in 2002 from the University of Southern California with master's degree. Then I got my PhD from Texas Women's University in Houston, 2006. Currently, I'm speaking to you from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. I am currently teaching at King Saud bin Abdulaziz University for Health Sciences in the Department of Occupational Therapy. And my home university is the Hashemite University in Jordan. Just to give you a little bit of overview about occupational therapy in Saudi Arabia, on the academic level, they just started their bachelor degrees or the academic programs just 8 years ago. So we thought of starting some occupational therapy researches with some foundational researches such as occupational needs, participation, accessibility, so some basic concepts about OT. And this presentation today is about one of the researches that we conducted by the title of, as you can see, wheelchair accessibility of mosques in Riyadh. So as all of us in the OT community knows, according to the occupational therapy practice framework, domain, and process, we highly value engagement in occupation because we consider it as an ultimate goal for human beings and has great influence on their health and well-being. So occupations offer a central meaning to individuals and groups. And according to our framework, occupation is a universal concept and it has various definitions, and one of them is activities of everyday life named, organized, and given value and meaning by individuals and culture. So it is a universal concept. However, when we come at the activity level, we can find that there are variabilities among occupations from different countries, different cultures, even among individuals. And we categorize those occupations or activities into ADLs, IADLs, work, leisure, play, etc. One of the activities, religious and spiritual, that are meaningful and purposeful to individuals and groups. And this is the focus of this presentation. People, as we know, tend to express their religious and spiritual needs according to their respective religions. And Muslims, for example, have their own beliefs and rituals. Islam, as we all know, is one of the major religions in the world. And it has 5 pillars or essentials, including praying, which we focus on in this presentation. And one of the studies says that 22% of people living in the world, they are from Muslims. Praying at least 5 times a day is mandated in Islam. And to be closer to Allah or God, according to Islam, prayers must take place in mosque, especially at noon or Friday. However, sometimes you can pray in your home as Muslim, or some Muslims they pray in their offices at work. But to get the best reward from God, you must go to the mosque to pray among crowd, especially at noon on Friday. So similar to Christians when they go Sunday to the church, Muslims they must go to pray in the mosque, especially at noon on Friday. Those are the 5 pillars of Islam. The first one is declaration of faith, obligatory prayer, compulsory giving, zakat, fasting in the month of Ramadan, and pilgrimage to Mecca. So our focus today is on the obligatory prayer. And we just mentioned the importance of praying for Muslims in the mosque. They need to go to the mosque to do their prayers. According to the WHO, having a disability may prevent a person from performing religious rituals. And disability, according to the International Classification of Functioning Disability and Health, is defined as an umbrella term for impairment at the level of body function or structure, activity limitations, and participation restrictions. It denotes, we are referring to disability, it denotes the negative aspects of the interaction between the individual who has a health condition or disability and their contextual factors, which is the environmental factors, whether it's physical, social, cultural, and personal factors. We can use the ICF to evaluate the impact of impairment on the individual's ability to participate in daily life activities and act in his or her environment. So if he has an impairment and he did not work into fixing that, this might affect his activity, and this will eventually lead to participation restrictions. We can also use ICF to evaluate the effectiveness of our interventions, and our interventions should be focused on facilitating participation. So, to measure the effectiveness of our interventions, that is directed towards minimizing the impact of disability and maximizing participation, we can use the ICF to evaluate that. Impairment and disability, according to Bromley et al., can be viewed from two perspectives, from the medical and the social models. According to the medical model, they view disability as a problem of the individual, of the person, and the health team members need to work with this person to overcome his problem, his or her problem. This is the medical view. While the social model, it says that disability is a problem of the society. The society should work into facilitating participation. So if there's no participation on the part of the people with disability, it is the problem of the society. While the ICF, it has a combination. They view disability from those two models, from the medical model as well as the social model. From an occupational therapy perspective, for A disabled follower of Islam, accessibility to a mosque is essential. We just mentioned how important for Muslims to go physically to the mosque. So accessibility to the mosque is highly essential. And to define accessibility, it refers to the degree to which an environment can be approached, entered, operated in, or used safely and with dignity by people with disability. Environmental factors, according to the ICF, are external to the persons and can affect their performance positively or negatively. So if there are barriers to the environment, this means that a person with disability cannot access the environment and eventually he will have participation restrictions. To enable integration into society, people with disability must have full accessibility to public places. From a global perspective, the World Health Organization created guidelines, and those guidelines were adopted by all countries prohibiting discrimination against people with disabilities. So the USA, for example, they promulgated the Disabilities Act, which is well known as the ADA, American with Disability Act. It's a comprehensive civil rights regulation that prohibits discrimination and guarantees people with disability the same opportunities as everyone else. The ADA emphasized that people with disability should have access to employment opportunities, public transportation, public places such as restaurants, schools, museums, telecommunication, to purchase goods and services, and to participate in state and local government programs and services. In addition to the ADA, also universal design has been developed as a means to provide accessibility to all buildings for wheelchair and other disabled users as well as non-disabled. So we have the ADA, we have the universal design as well. Accessibility to public buildings is a widespread problem. There are several studies that have been conducted, and I'm going to go through each one of them. For example, in 2009, this study by EVCO was done in Istanbul, Turkey. This study reports that accessibility to public buildings in Istanbul is also problematic to wheelchair users. Another study that was conducted in 2002 in Boston and North Carolina on religious buildings, homes of friends, and workplaces for people using wheelchair. It reports that participants faced challenges in accessing those mentioned places. Another study was conducted in 3 large shopping centers in New Mexico to assess the enforcement of the ADA accessibility guidelines for parking lots. Entrances, ramps, elevators, telephones, restrooms, and food courts. The study concluded that none of the malls were fully compliant in any areas of accessibility for wheelchair users. Similar results were concluded in an earlier study that was conducted on 13 public buildings. And by the way, this study was done in Utica, New York, on 13 public buildings, private and governmental buildings for accessibility for wheelchair users, and same results. There were barriers in accessibility. This study was conducted in Ibadan, Nigeria in 2005. They assess wheelchair accessibility in 38 public buildings, including hospitals, schools, social and recreational centers, and government buildings. The results of the study revealed a low level of wheelchair accessibility of the targeted public buildings. In 2002, a lit review study was done. They reviewed 12 studies concerning wheelchair accessibility in public buildings. The study concluded that parking lots had the lowest compliance rate to accessibility, while building entrances had the highest, and none of the studies reported 100% compliance to accessibility codes in spite of law enforcement. Now, speaking about the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, as some of you might know, it's the second largest Arab country after Egypt, with a population of more than 28 million, and almost all Saudi citizens are Muslims. This is the country in yellow. Riyadh is the capital of the kingdom, with a population of more than 6 million people. There are limited studies about wheelchair users and mosque accessibility in Riyadh, which is important in the context of 3.73% of KSA population having functional disability. So we're talking about near to 250,000 people living in Riyadh with functional disability. So this is the magnitude of the problem over here. Cause of disability in Saudi is mainly due to motor vehicle accidents, stroke, cerebral palsy, head and spinal cord injuries. And speaking about motor vehicle accident, we put it as number one. Just to put you in the perspective, in 2017, there were about 80,000 people became disabled due to motor vehicle accidents. Motor vehicle accidents in Saudi is considered, or Saudi is considered a leading country in the world in the percentage of motor vehicle accidents among its population. According to the Ministry of Islamic Affairs, Riyadh city has more than 17,000 mosques. And we mentioned about the importance of praying in the mosques. That's why in each neighborhood you can find at least one main mosque. KSA adopted the Persons with Disability Guidelines in 2000. In the year 2000, it includes the Saudi Building Code detailed guidelines, which was released by the Ministry of Municipal and Rural Affairs and approved by the city's municipalities. The Saudi Building Code included all accessibility laws, regulations, and guidelines for all types of disabilities, including wheelchair users. And it's consistent with the ADA and the universal design. And as we mentioned earlier, the WHO, all countries approved the guidelines that was adopted by the WHO regarding people with disability and accessibility. So one of the chapters about the Saudi Building Code focused on wheelchair accessibility to mosques with technical details to all aspects of accessibility, starting from the proper selection of the location of the mosques to be within easy reach of people using wheelchairs, parking lots, ramps, entrances and doors, bathrooms and ablution, which we call it the wudu areas, and highlighting the sound and lighting and sound systems. So all these things need to be accessed by people with disability, including those who use wheelchair. The main purpose of the law was to promote the inclusion of people with disability in all aspects of their daily life, including worshiping, education, and public services. According to Al-Mansour, and this study was done in the United Arab Emirates, 2016, he reported that three essential elements are required in a mosque architecture. The prayer, so wherever you go, any mosque, any main mosque, you can find those three essential elements should be present in the mosque. The prayer hall, where the prayer takes place, and it's usually spacious. The ablution, which is the wudu area where Muslims must wash certain areas of their body in preparation for prayer. So before you pray, you need to perform the ablution, which is the wudu, and the lavatories area, or the toilet area. The three areas are separated from each other, which add accessibility requirements, especially for persons with physical disability. Al-Mansour concluded that people with physical disabilities experience difficulties in accessing several areas of the mosque, such as the entrance, the ablution area, the lavatories, and the shoe racks. So just to put you in perspective, these are the types of mosques where you can find in each neighborhood here in Saudi Arabia. Each neighborhood you can find these such mosques. This is the prayer hall, and as I just mentioned, it's spacious from inside. This is the ablution area where wudu or ablution takes place, as you can see. And those are the shoe racks that each prayer you cannot go inside the mosque with your shoes on. You need to put your shoes in the shoe rack, then go inside, and when you come back, you can retrieve your shoes. So those are the main areas that should be available in each mosque. So the purpose of this study was to assess the accessibility of mosques in Riyadh from the perspective of wheelchair users and their caregivers. So to do that, we developed two questionnaires, one for wheelchair users and the other one for their caregivers. And based on the ICF, the physical context of the mosque was the focus of the questionnaires, of course, to find its impact on functioning and participation in prayer in the mosques from wheelchair users' perspective. To ensure content validity of the questionnaires that we developed, we sent the questionnaires to a panel of experts, three of them. Two of them were occupational therapists and one physical therapist. They had at least 10 years of clinical experience. We benefited from the feedback they gave us, and we revised the questionnaires according to their feedback. So the questionnaire that was directed for wheelchair users, the first part was demographic data about their age, gender, nationality, the use of wheelchair, whether it is temporary or permanent, and since how long they were using the wheelchair. And specifically, we asked them 11 questions to assess different aspects of accessibility to mosque using a Likert scale with 5 options. They strongly agree to strongly disagree. So we asked them about whether the mosque was appropriately located close to where they live, about the parking lots accessibility, the bathroom, the entrance and exit to the mosque when inside the prayer hall, the wudu area, the ablution area, the sinks, etc. So 11 areas about mosque were asked. for wheelchair users using a Likert scale. And for the caregiver, we gave them two main questions regarding the number of times a day the wheelchair user is accompanied to the mosque and rating their satisfaction with the accessibility of the mosque from 1 to 5, from highly satisfied to highly dissatisfied. And before we started our data collection, we got the IRB approval through the KMARC, which is the King Abdullah International Medical Research Center that is affiliated, it's a research center that's affiliated by our university, King Saud bin Abdulaziz University for Health Sciences. So once we get the IRB approval, we started our data collection. About the participants and setting, a purposive sample of wheelchair users and caregivers participated in this study. The eligibility criteria included having no cognitive impairment. This is about the wheelchair users to be included in the study. He or she should not have any cognitive impairment. They should be cognitively intact. They should be able to read and write. And wheelchair user for at least a month. And for the caregivers to be included in the study, in case they accompanied their clients to mosques, were also required to meet the inclusion criteria of literacy, cognitive ability, and accompanying and helping wheelchair users in and out of mosques. The main mosques in northern and eastern Riyadh. So we selected mosques from northern and eastern Riyadh, which were the most populated parts of Riyadh. The inclusion criteria for the mosques included, we have two types of mosques. Main mosques, which has a capacity of more than 200 individuals to perform prayers at one time. And in those mosques, Friday or Jum'ah prayer, these are the criteria for main or formal mosque, and at least one wheelchair user using the mosque. And we excluded rooms that are designated for Muslims prayers in different businesses, public areas such as restaurants, gas stations, and malls. We excluded those from the study because it's not considered main mosques. The mosques that met the inclusion criteria were identified and a list of mosques was prepared. To analyze our data, we used descriptive statistics of frequencies, percentages, and we used the SPSS version 16 for data analysis. Now let's come to the results. So table 1 here, we were able to 48 individual wheelchair users participated in this study. We recruited them from 15 mosques that met the inclusion criteria. As you can see here about the age, more than half of the participants, about 54%, were 21 to 35 years. And just to let you know, population of KSA, they are mainly young generations. And we just mentioned that the main purpose or the main reason for physical disability is due to motor vehicle accidents. So you can imagine that usually this affects younger population. So more than half of the participants were between 21 to 35 years old, and 18% were above 45 years old. The majority, 98% of them were Saudi citizens. A small group, 19%, was using the wheelchair temporarily, which means 1 month or less than 1 month to less than 3 months. 81% were using the wheelchair permanently. The main reason for using the wheelchair was due to spinal cord injury resulting from motor vehicle accidents, followed by stroke. The majority, which is 64%, go to the mosque 3 to 5 times per day. When we ask them about their levels of satisfaction with mosques accessibility, the following were the results. As you can see, 67% of the participants reported that the mosque appropriately located, that is within 2 kilometers of where they live. And we mentioned a while ago that in each neighborhood you can find at least one or two main mosques. So that was not a problem reaching the mosque. When you ask about parking lots and accessibility, 42% reported that they disagreed and strongly disagreed that the parking lots were accessible. So to them, it was not accessible. And 21% were neutral. When asked about whether bathrooms were accessible, 67% of them reported that it was not accessible. And the question about if they can easily enter and exit the mosques, 42% reported that they have difficulty in that. 60% or 59% reported that they can maneuver the wheelchair freely inside because, as we just mentioned, the prayer hall is usually spacious. 69% of the participants, they reported difficulty accessing the wudu area, the ablution area. And 71% reported they have difficulty accessing and using the sinks easily. Even door handles to 31% of the participants was not easily accessible, and 27% reported that they have difficulty accessing the shoe racks. So all over, according to question 10, 84% reported that they need someone to help them propelling their wheelchairs. So they cannot go to the mosques independently. And even when they are in the mosque, they need somebody to propel them. And 86%, which is like the vast majority of them, they reported dissatisfaction, they reported disagreement and strongly disagreement with the statement that says, I'm satisfied about the accessibility of the mosques for wheelchair users. So 86% were dissatisfied with the accessibility of mosque accessibility to wheelchair users. And from the caregiver's perspective, if mosque accessibility, well, caregivers participated with us. 92% reported that they accompany their the wheelchair users about 2 to 4 times a day to the mosque. And when asked about how would you rate your satisfaction about accessibility to mosques, 84% reported that they were unsatisfied and highly unsatisfied with accessibility. Discussion. It was notable that the number of wheelchair users that used the mosques were low compared to the high population in the areas in Riyadh chosen for this study. So I'm sure each one of you asked why only 48% participated. And I mentioned that there are about 250,000 individuals with functional disability. So why we only have 48 participants? Only few wheelchair users were witnessed in the mosques in spite of the efforts of the research assistants going to the mosque at different prayer times to identify possible participants. So we went at several occasions, because you know the 5 prayers, it can start from sunrise, noontime, afternoon until sunset. This observation gave an indication about the accessibility issue of the mosques for wheelchair users in spite of the significance of prayer in mosques by all Muslims. Therefore, poor access for people with disability to mosques presented a physical barrier for the majority of wheelchair users to participate in an important occupation in their daily life, which is to perform prayers in a mosque. None of the participants were female, and I'm sure you noticed that. And when asked, it was due to the fact that culturally the majority of females in KSA pray at home. So it was not only about people with disability or female using wheelchairs. Females in general in Saudi Arabia, they pray at home. The finding that the cause of disability of the participant was mainly motor vehicle accident, and we mentioned that, is supported in the literature related to causes of disability in KSA. It's the number one cause. Mosques are available in all areas in Saudi, in each business, neighborhood, shopping centers, and all public places. Living in close proximity to a mosque, therefore, was not an issue. Each neighborhood can find one or two mosques. In addition, mosques are spacious and can accommodate hundreds of people during praying or prayer time, supporting the finding that wheelchair users did not find it difficult to maneuver the wheelchair while inside the prayer hall. The wheelchair users did not face challenges in several aspects. Sorry. Accessibility in the parking lots was not appropriate, and they mentioned that. Wheelchair users needed assistance from a caregiver to drive them to the front of the mosque, exit the car, being placed in a wheelchair and entering the mosque. After this process, the caregiver has to park the car in an overcrowded parking lot, not developed to accommodate wheelchair users. So you can notice here that wheelchair users, they are not independent. They need somebody to drive them, then to take them inside or wheel them inside the mosque. Before any prayer, the Muslims must perform ablution, which is called the wudu. During the ablutions, the person praying must wash his hands, arms, mouth, nose, face, ears, head, and feet a number of times in an organized and sequencing manner. Prayer, according to Islam, cannot be done without ablution. So the prayer needs to go to the ablution area to prepare for the wudu. Then he can go to the prayer hall to perform his prayer. However, some people, they can come from their home. They do the ablution at their home. But if they are working or if they work in public, they need to go to the ablution area to do or to prepare for praying. Each mosque must have enough bathrooms as well as areas that are designated for ablution and equipped with sinks, faucets, and other supplies required. However, as we just mentioned in the results, this result showed that bathrooms and ablution areas were not accessible for most wheelchair users. Possibly the reason why wheelchair users refrain from going to mosques, although it's mandatory in Islam. So this is an important cause to us why people did not go to mosque, especially people using wheelchairs. Ramps were not available in some mosques, posing a challenge for wheelchair users while entering and leaving the mosque. Mosques with ramps were not well designed and did not follow the universal design of ramps. And I will show you some pictures. And this was not unique to Saudi Arabia, and we mentioned similar studies, similar results were found in other studies. Muslims are not supposed to enter the prayer area with their shoes on. They have to remove their shoes, place them on the shoe racks outside the prayer area, and then retrieve the shoes again on their way out. Some participants indicated the accessibility of the shoe racks as a problem. In general, the majority of wheelchair users were not satisfied with the mosque's accessibility. expressing their dependence of an assistance to accompany them. Their dissatisfaction regarding the mosque's accessibility was consistent with the caregivers' responses, and we show that in the results. So those are some of the pictures. Take a look at them. Look, for example, at the picture on the right lower corner. There is a ram. However, the door is closed. And the lower left side picture, I'm not sure if this is a real ram, but as you can see, it does not follow the universal design criteria. Here, the picture on the left side, this is the bathroom door. As you can see, it's not wide enough and it has a step. However, there are no ramp to it. And on the right side, this is a large mosque. However, it has no ramp to go inside. In spite of having building code adopted by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and specifically outlined the technical aspect of mosques design guidelines for wheelchair users, it was found that codes were not enforced and not followed. Accessibility issues to mosques, parking lots, bathrooms, pollution areas, sinks, entrances, and exit door handles and shoe racks created a serious participation restriction to wheelchair users. The physical environment of the mosques, in this case, according to the ICF, impacted wheelchair users a great deal and restricted their community participation. The lack of accessibility to public places, including mosques, worshipping places, employment, education, and other public services play an important role in segregating people with disability from the mainstream and preventing the society from benefiting from this important group of people. The ICF concepts provided a structural framework which supports this study. It was clear how the physical environment of the mosque restricted wheelchair users from participating in a meaningful occupation, which is performing their daily prayers in a mosque. However, if proper accessibility guidelines for people with disability were implemented, the situation may be different and could lead to more wheelchair users participating in prayers within the mosques. So implications for practice, especially for us as occupational therapists. The current situation means that wheelchair users find it easier to pray in their houses and prevent them from community participation. And I just want to point one thing over here. Going to the mosque does not have only benefit, religious benefit, but also social. There are lots of social interaction before prayers and after prayers. People tends to go together, like neighbors, they go together to the mosque. During their way going to the mosque, there are lots of conversation, discussion, they catch up with different stories. So it's a good social gathering. So wheelchair users are losing lots of that. The lack of accessibility caused by environmental barriers prevents them from practicing an important part of their faith. To overcome the current barriers, several solutions can be made, such as, for example, enforcing current Saudi and international building codes on new mosques. The building codes are there, rules, regulations are there, however, it's not implemented. Renovation of current mosques to meet the Saudi and international building codes concerning people with disabilities. Empowering wheelchair users by increasing their awareness about their right to access public buildings, including religious buildings. Professionals in the field of accessibility, such as OTs, architects, urban planners, and interior architects working together or working with wheelchair users to promote the importance of accessibility in public buildings and need to be involved in building construction and modification. Moreover, results of this study should be taken into consideration by rehabilitation professionals, activists in the field of human rights, as well as the Saudi Ministry of Municipal and Rural Affairs to generate a monitoring system that evaluates public places against the approved technical guidelines of accessibility for people with disability. Doing so can play an important role in facilitation of community integration for people with disability. It was obvious from this study the challenges that are facing the wheelchair users in accessing main areas of mosques, and we found that those findings were consistent with other studies. Accessibility to public places is still an important issue for wheelchair users all over the world. The Saudi law of disabled care system was adopted in 1981. However, it was obvious from this study that religiously and culturally important public places such as mosques are not accessible to wheelchair users. Public authorities in KSA must take effective steps in mandating and implementing the already approved law regarding accessibility. OTs, as well as other health professionals, should play an important role in this aspect, such as empowering people with disability in evaluating and determining their accessibility needs in public places and be oriented about their rights, increasing public awareness about accessibility issues among people with disability. The ICF model must be used as a global framework for evaluating the accessibility to public places and the effectiveness of accessibility interventions. Limitations of this study. Findings of this study cannot be generalized because number of participants, both wheelchair users and caregivers, were limited to only 48 individuals or 48 people with disability. It would be useful in the future if a qualitative study could be conducted to interview wheelchair users, their caregivers, as well as mosques imams to gain a deeper understanding of the challenges in accessing mosques and their feedback and recommendations. It is recommended that a future study be conducted on the main mosque in Riyadh with all means of accessibility for wheelchair users and compare the number of wheelchair users to that mosque before and after improving accessibility, as well as their level of satisfaction and dependency level. As a conclusion, mosques targeted in this study were found not to be accessible for wheelchair users. The current situation mandates seclusion of wheelchair users to pray in their houses and prevents them from practicing an important part of their faith. Wheelchair users must be accompanied by someone to overcome the environmental barriers, preventing them from practicing their independence, which adds an additional burden on their families. Enforcing current legislations of KSA to guarantee accessibility of mosques will ensure the freedom of all to practice their faith independently in a meaningful and valued manner. By the end, I would like to thank wheelchair users and caregivers who participated in this study. A special thanks to King Abdullah International Medical Research Center and Mrs. Dana Stambuli for their assistance in editing this study. Those were the references that we used, and thank you very much for your good listening.
Thank you so much for a very interesting webinar. I love that you had photos because that made the experience come alive to someone like myself who has never been in a mosque. So
Yeah.
I think it's wonderful to have occupational therapy be involved in this. And you talked about future studies. What will it take for these future studies to be able to happen, to have a larger sample size as well? You know, do you need to investigate grant opportunities? What will make that become a reality, the next study?
Thank you, Karen. The good news is a couple of weeks ago we had a conference. And in that conference, I was very happy to see that there was one company called the Modifier, and it was developed by new occupational therapists. And what they do such projects. And as an associate prof in my university, one of the courses I'm teaching called Context for Occupational Performance, and we go to houses, to public places such as mosques, evaluate accessibility, to malls, all over, to public buildings. And we have, as we did in this study, we have recommendations. So this companies, they told us, listen, this is what we do. You bring us the projects, and we have access to government fund. They already have money, and they can implement the projects that we proposed. So we were so excited. And next time, within a month, we are going to start this course, and we are going to give them. And I spoke about this particular study that I just presented, and they are going to take it to the next level. And what they will do, they promise, they will go to the mosques, at least a couple of mosques, for example, and they will do the accessibility recommendations that we recommended. And after that, my plan is to re-evaluate, see, we are going to announce that to the public, that those mosques are now accessible for wheelchair users. And then we will re-evaluate, see if number of wheelchair users started to pick up going to the mosques. So this is the good news.
That's fabulous. That's wonderful. How can you let the media know about this, or do you feel that this is something that you don't want to contact the media about? Because I think it's really important that everybody become aware of the situation, and that change has to occur, and that there's legislation that's just not being implemented.
This is true. And here in Saudi, they are very active when it comes to media. They use the social media, especially the Twitter. They have so many TV stations that broadcast to the whole Arab world. And there are lots of activists in the field of human rights, uh, especially for people with disabilities. So accessing the media, I don't think it's going to be a problem. And our students, they are really active. They did lots of projects where they went to the media, they did TV interviews. So we did several awareness days in different malls, different hospitals. So accessing the public is not a problem like before.
That's wonderful. And I love that you mentioned your students. I think helping students when they're students to become advocates and look at themselves as agents of change is so important. So we're going to conclude, but do you have any last thoughts you'd like to share with us before we conclude this webinar?
Uh, I would like to thank you first, but also I am really excited because we started in Saudi Arabia. I mentioned in the beginning that the OT programs at the academic level just started 8 years ago. Now you started to find more OT, Saudi OTs. And as we know, the best person to provide OT services is from the person from the same culture, because those therapists, and most of them are from females, they're more about they are more aware about their cultural needs. So I can bring just one example. A main psychiatric hospital did not have an OT department. Just imagine that. Now, since we started to graduate our students and we started to send our students as visits, they were introduced about the value of occupational therapy services for their clients, for the patients in these psychiatric hospitals. And just last year, they opened a big OT department. So we are very excited here in Saudi Arabia that we started to see more Saudi OTs entering this field.
That's wonderful. And, you know, as they enter into the field in Saudi, hopefully there'll be a wave of occupational therapy practitioners all over the world wanting to do the same in
Exactly.
places where there are mosques. So thank you so much again for being a guest on Learn at Work. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.